the Overprepared DM podcast. My name's Jen, and
my name is Nick,
and we're here with Casual. Hello.
Hey, what can I say? It's Jay Casual.
It's Jay Casual. Welcome in, friend. It's nice that you're here.
It's nice to be here. It's well decorated. I like it in here.
Thank you for giving the illusion that we have some form of studio.
I mean, it's well decorated. This chair you gave me is really comfy. I enjoy it. No, this is
great. Well, Casual or Jay, tell us about you. Who are you? What are you all about?
Okay. Wow. I was not prepared for my Tinder bio, but I guess I'll start it off.
Your Tinder bio.
Jay Casual, all social media at Just2Casual and CasualCreativity on Twitch. I am what I like to call a wordsmith, all-around entertainer. If it is anything with words, I specialize in it, especially when it comes to speaking. So I'm a prolific writer, storyteller. I'm also a professional storyteller and dungeon master for all kinds of TTRPGs. I'm also a professional actor, voice actor, writer, director. And I also have 3 degrees in business, law, and psychology, because why not?
You are busy.
Oh, yeah. I try to be. That's where my life is now.
So my response was going to be like, I would swipe left on that. But then I don't remember. Like, I haven't been on Tinder in so long that I don't even know what the correct direction is. So I could have just, like, denied you on accident.
You did.
I did.
You just, yeah. You just said will not. You know, it's fair. It's
yeah,
fair.
Just kidding. Okay, so I'm right on that. Got it.
Yeah.
But this is a conversation-style podcast called the Overprepared DM. We talk about some tips and tricks and information for you brand new DMs out there looking for some advice. And we're here to tell you, don't over-prepare. But we're going to do it anyway. Yep. We did it so you don't have to. But Nick always starts us off with the same question for every guest.
Yes. If you think back to the first time you ever ran any game, or the first, your beginning of your career as a DM or GM, what is something you did back then that you definitely do not do now? Something that you would go back in time and say, stop. That's dumb. You're over-preparing. Don't do it anymore.
Oh, I can tell you right now, the one thing I did was prolifically, and I had to immediately cut it and will never do again, was try to predict what my players will do.
Oh.
I try to plan for everything I think they'll do, so I would create alternatives like, I will outsmart them by making sure if they do it, I'll be ready for it. And then I learned that they don't do what they would do either. So I would prepare an entire segment being like, yeah, they'll go this way. And just in case, if they go this way, I'm good. And then they wouldn't. And I would immediately be like, well, I have no idea what to do now. Because I over-prepared too linear.
Yeah, and that's so funny, and that really aligns with what I over-prepared when I first started, but mine was insane, and I've talked about it a lot. I prepared so much to the point where I would write a line or sentence or a pathway based on every possible role that they could possibly make. And I would be like, what if they wanted to do a history check here? What if they wanted to do athletics, acrobatics, insight? What if they wanted to do all this? I would write so many things. I'd have like 20 pages for 15 minutes of like content that I would read one page of. And not even. It would just be like the intro that I half read, and then I just set the paper to the side. It was a huge mess. Jeez.
So with that, what do you do now? That's going to be a question people ask. Like, because what I do personally, if they ask me something or want something that I wasn't ready for, roll a die. If you succeed on it, then I will build something in there that they brought to me, right? Player agency. But what's your method on that situation now?
So, the best way to start to answer this question is to first provide one bit of context. I no longer do any preparation that takes longer than 10 minutes. I don't prepare more than 10 minutes for any session because whenever I do a session, I have 3 rules. It's where you are currently headed as a team that you've already described to me, where I hope that you'll end up, and at least one major plot twist I will include to break what you expect. And that is literally where that methodology sits in ensuring things are kind of tracked in that way. I improv everything, so it's not even about knowing multiple steps, multiple options. Most of my dungeons aren't even designed. I go with the flow of the energy. I take it, I think, from acting. When you do theater, you really feed off the audience. So as the storyteller, if everyone's really nervous about the exploration, then I'll drag it a little longer so that they really feel that tension. If I could tell that they're going bullheaded through a bunch of things, I'll do one thing to slow them down and then move on to the next step. So I literally just go with whatever the vibe is more than anything, because I think that's the most important part. When you're playing or making it, it's for the players. Have it in mind. Let them feel that heroicness they want, or not. If that's the campaign build where you want them to feel that grittiness, then make them feel that and run with that. It doesn't have to be too scripted.
So I have a follow-up question to that. You said you don't prep anything unless it takes you 10 minutes. And we had someone on this podcast who said something very similar. They said if it does not fit on a note card, front and back, it's too much.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you do that? How do you do that? Vague question. You ready? I'm asking you how to not be over-prepared by preparing to not be prepared.
Oh, yeah.
The genist questions.
The continuity error of oxymorons.
Yes, of course.
So when I talk to a lot of DMs, I've met DMs who say it takes them 6 hours to prep for a 2-hour session. I've met some that are less, maybe an hour. Some say they do it overnight. Some people have notebooks and so on. I think the best way that I do it to not over prepare by just preparing enough is I focus on bonds and hooks of my players, and I constantly pull on those threads. That's my entire focus. I don't think the dungeon matters as much. The environment matters as much. The only thing that matters is the compelling story. I think about it in the same way when I play video games or watch certain movies. I've seen really bad movies with really great stories. I've seen movies that look really good, but the story's so bad that I'll never watch it again and I regret it. And I play that same principle on my table. So if I have 5 players, I know what they each want, what their major main hook to the story is. And then I also know what their bonds are to each other, what their rivalry bonds are. And that's all I actually ever need. So I'm just going to say, how do I keep pulling on those threads to get them to the destination I've already created? So I don't need to decide how many dungeon walls, what kind of traps it's going to be. I'm just going to keep them going down this thread. And if ever they feel like they're going off that thread, I'm not going to tell them to go a different direction, but I'm just going to pull on that thread. And as an example, if I have a player that's looking for the long lost sibling and they start doing missions that don't go that way, they're going to hear word of something that's tied to their sibling who might be in danger. I'm not saying go do that, but I'm saying, hey, don't forget, that's still happening and you're running out of time. So that's it. Every time I start a new session, I'm just yeah, this is the thread. I'm just going to keep pulling on this thread. And I'm going to keep pulling on that thread however much time I have until you feel that tension of because I like pulling that tension where someone's that stressful moment where maybe I'll get there, maybe I'll do it. And then giving them the reward of almost getting there, and then give them the opportunity to have that solution, but with complication. And that's my thing. Everything you do either gives you a complication or an advantage on top of it, depending on how well you roll. And that's where I sit. If you roll low and succeed, well then, yeah, you succeeded, but bad things are happening. If you roll well and get way higher, then yay, congratulations, things get better for you. To really drive, the narrative more than anything.
And I think that really of the hobby, of the TTRPG hobby. Back in the day, in the Gygax era, it was all about the dungeon. What is the dungeon? The dungeon is the setting. The dungeon is the story. Whereas now it's more people wanting to tell their own stories, and that's I think it's better, personally. And yeah.
I remember I was talking with someone actually recently when I came back when I was at Gen Con. I was talking with someone who's been a dungeon master for almost 30 years, I think they said. And one thing that it dawned on me at Gen Con is the original Dungeons and Dragons was a tactical strategy game. They call it the
Shame,
world's
man.
greatest role-playing game,
Right.
but it was originally designed as a tactical strategy game. Even
Mhm.
5th edition, even though it has more role-playing into it, the mechanics are designed to be tactical. Your whole focus is how much resources I have. How do I use them? I have so much action economy. How do I overcome resistances, immunities? Like, mechanically, it's all about strategy. It's tactical combat.
Mm-hmm.
But it's because we never really got to explore just sitting back and doing the roleplay aspect. So if you're doing the tactical mechanical, you should prepare because that is what you're doing. If they're a dungeon crawl and they're doing combat, yeah, you need to prepare combat because you want to make sure statistically you're measuring what you want. But if you're not doing something that's very crawly or just combat focused, you can be much more lax and go with the flow of the narrative as it's presented because 5th edition is now becoming in the mainstream a actual role-playing game. It's like playing Sims. You just live the life and hope for the best. And things may be random, but you get to control a lot more of it without that tactical randomness that's driven into the mechanics.
And absolutely, if you don't have a DM, a player will absolutely die grilling a grilled cheese.
You say that as a joke. I remember I had a party where we were playing Dungeons & Dragons, and the entire party drowned in a shallow river.
Oh, no!
The DM did nothing. The DM was just like, yeah, here's a river. And our roles and our bad decisions, our entire party drowned. And the DM was like, okay,
so
one of you can, so one of you get this, you can maybe get out. And we're like, yeah. And party of 5 in a shallow river, mind you. The river was 4.5 feet deep, and we had elves, and we still drowned. It's that bad. So, yeah.
So you did you guys have both mentioned dungeons and how sometimes or the tactical means of making dungeons very crawly. Do you guys still in either Dungeons and Dragons or any tabletop games that you guys are playing, do you still plan or create those, or do you have a moment in your improv mind where you just feel like the dungeon is done and then it's over with? How do you plan that out?
I literally don't plan out the dungeon. I'm very, and I think that's why I use the 3-point method. I'm like, if you think about a dungeon, it's always when you enter the dungeon, there's some stuff going on. Then there's the second part of the dungeon, which is where you finally get information that's relevant to when you get to the final part of the dungeon. And then there's the final part of the dungeon. And then I kind of do that. There's 3 paths to each of those. And those 3 paths, I may have you go 2 of them at a time. So you may go down, I'm like, cool, maybe there'll be a boulder trap or something. But I also go based on what my players are doing. If they're just trying to run through the dungeon, I want them to be scared. So I'm going to start putting traps because I want them to start thinking about it. If they're being overly cautious, I'll start pulling traps away because I want them to push forward. So my dungeon, I think I just keep it to pace until I pull enough threads on each of my players. And I'm like, cool, here's your next hook. You're at the second level. And I'll do the same thing. And I'm like, and here's the boss room. But then again, I'm notoriously known for, even when you reach the boss room, I use JRPGs where every boss has 3 different forms, and the boss is never the boss. So I beat the boss. You're like, yeah, no, that was a minion. They're like, what? I'm like, yeah.
Elaborate on that though. I'm curious. How do you have we're going into the second phase? Oh, we're in the third phase. They're harder. What is an example of something that you've done? That's so cool.
So my second phases are always emotionally driven, not just, oh, they're bigger and better. I'm not like, oh, the lich has now become an uber mega lich. It's always something like, one of my favorite ones to this day is an adventure where I did it was a completely improvised one shot that I did just spur of the moment. Cause they're like, hey, let's do D&D. And I'm like, cool, let me think of something. Give me 5 minutes. So they ended up having to go to this area that was connected to the Underdark, and they were going to go help people. And when they went there, they met this woman who was there, who's like, hey, I need your help because a lich is causing problems. So they're like, cool, yeah. So she went with them because she's like, yeah, and they took my brother and I want to go save my brother. And we're like, cool. And then she made it so far, and then at some point goes missing. And then we find the brother in the dungeon. And they're like, that's my second floor. So they get into the dungeon with the sister. The second step, they lose the sister, find the brother. And now they're like, oh, we got to find the sister. Where are we going to find the sister? So then they get to the third part where they fight the lich and they win. And after they beat the lich, they're like, well, we need to destroy the phylactery. And then that's when the next BBEG comes in, where I explain that the phylactery is the sister. And now they feel emotionally attached to the sister that they helped save. And now they're like, And now the boss is not just bigger, it's emotional. I don't want it to be like, oh, the Lich becomes a super Lich. It's like, no, the Lich now becomes something that's even more tangible because I want the tension as much as the conflict.
Right.
That's a big one I do. It's a lot of the person you thought was bad wasn't bad, or the person who you wanted to save, now you have to decide to sacrifice. Like those moments of making you go, are we the bad guys? Is my favorite question. I love getting that question.
Definitely. Yeah. See, when I think of dungeons or like boss battles, I really tend to go off what you mentioned, which was like the utilizing all of their resources. I want them to feel like they're grasping at straws at the end, but they come out strong and they've done it and they kicked its ass. One of the best ways that I did that was it was in a physical game, so we were all at a table. They could see the map that was uncovered. They knew that they were physically getting to the end of it, and they fought dragon wormlings, 2 of them. And then they were like, we've done it. So then they left the dungeon, and the mom dragon, adult dragon, came and fought them. They had just wasted all of their stuff on those 2 wormlings, and they had to fight an adult dragon with like 1 spell slot. Like, they've already done their action surge. They've already done, like, they've done that, and they were stressed, but they felt so good after kicking that dragon's ass.
I mean, that's fair when you're like, I don't have any of my normal tools and I still won. I mean, barely, but I did it.
Yeah, it's always good making them feel like they're going to lose.
Yes.
But then they still succeed on their own merit. Nothing that you did, but that's awesome.
Right. No, and the resource management and like the utilizing of all their stuff is really what I try to push in dungeons in general. I do, for one, make dungeons optional, or at least they can prepare to go there. So they can go and collect items, they can go and do whatever they want, but I know what they're collecting, and they're going to use all of them. They're going to use everything, because they're going to be in there for so long, but they're also choosing, or it's a story progression and they need to prepare. They're going to this dungeon and they're going to be in there for a long time. Like, you're not going to feel safe enough to have a long rest, but if you do, it's only going to be a short rest and it's going to be disrupted. Like, things like that. I really drive off that stress, and I think it's helpful. But in the future, it also makes the players make smaller, different decisions, at least in whether or not to do another dungeon. They're like, oh, I'll leave that cave alone. We had a bad experience. So it makes,
remember that worm? Ooh.
Yeah. It makes them feel a little bit smaller, as if not that I want them to feel bad, but it makes them feel like they're part of the world, not on top of it, and I want it to feel like a climb to get to be on top of the world. Like, you're not going to be level 5 and telling the city guards to, like, fuck off and not get in trouble. Like, I've had that issue before with players who just were on top of the world and they were just going to intimidation check everything. And I'm like, that's how you want to play. That's great. But also, these people are going to kick your ass.
Like, yeah, you did the Goblin Cave. Good for you. This is the Royal Guard. Best of luck to you.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a group of first-time players once, and they were meeting their guild heads, and one of the players was like, "Do you want me to kill this person?" And I like, "You're in the guild hall." It's like, "I won't stop you from doing it. I will tell you, there are consequences in this. This is not a video game. This isn't Skyrim. You can't just go away for 5 minutes and come back. Like, there's going to be consequences to this. That might change the whole campaign." So, but yeah, the consequence is important in a game like any game that we play TTRPG wise, because there's only so much a programmer can do in a video game, whereas we can actually say, oh, so you want to kill guards, now you're actually bandits, so let's have fun with this.
Yeah, I've had stuff like that. Like, I've had players do the whole try to steal from someone, get caught by the guards, and like, I could talk my way out, but I'm like, you remember the rule in this city, they don't tolerate crime. You're being executed. They're like, wait, what? I'm like, yeah, there's no ifs, ands, or buts. You can't talk your way out of it. You are now. They're like, oh, we need to break you out. I'm like, cool. So when they broke him out, I'm like, now you are all wanted criminals for also breaking out of. So now you're wanted. Like, we just will never go back to that town. I'm like, no, this is a big reach town. They are now in this entire region. You are a wanted criminal, and you've committed a war crime. And they're like, oh God, what have we done? I'm like, you made the choice.
Consequences.
Right.
I love it.
I think one of the campaigns is a pre-written campaign that I've played that does that that whole experience very well is Waterdeep Dragon Heist, or the Waterdeep in general. Waterdeep town or city, it's huge. There are written like laws in the book for Waterdeep, and it's like, if you do this, it's punishable by this, it's punishable by this, and it's punished, and you have to have a job, otherwise you're not like contributing to society. Like, there's so much going on in this town that you feel so small. You're like a citizen who doesn't want to break the rules, and if you join like a thieves syndicate underground or whatever, like, if you get caught, like, you're dead. That's like, you can't just see a lawyer. Like, that's not a thing.
Yeah.
But Jay, you write a bunch of different campaigns in general, or at least games and one shots and all sorts of worlds. Do you have like sort of like overstepping or similar like D&D 5e rules, or do you just make everything new? Like, how do you tell us about your stuff? I want to know. I want to know the meat.
So it all started with me just doing like 5e and then gutting the mechanical side of 5e as much as I possibly can, so that way it's just narrative fun. Like, one example is I use the 5e D20 system, but I call it the D20 narrative system. So it uses what you normally make a character sheet in 5e, but like all challenges, no matter what they are DC 20. But the way I treat it is, if you are proficient in a skill, it decreases the DC by 5. If you have advantage in the skill, it decreases it by an additional 5. However, if you have an expertise in a skill, it decreases the challenge by 10. That way, it's just more of a narrative scale of how far you can go, rather than being very itsy-bitsy the numbers, because my goal is just that. What I have on top of that is, anytime you complete a skill by 5 or more, you get what I consider an opportunity, meaning that if you succeed by at least 5 or greater, you will do what you meant to do and good things happen. One example I have in my like 5e narrative system is, if you're doing an Arcana check to read magic runes and you get a increase by 5 or more, you accidentally cast detect magic without spelling a spell slot, because you're not just understanding Arcana, something inside of you has triggered more, because I feel like that's the superhero in you. It's the fact that you are blessed to be a hero at the end of the day. This is how it shows. Otherwise, you're small in my world. But these moments that happen when you roll high. Then I have, if you roll 10 or greater, then you get what I call a limit break, meaning temporarily something magical happens to you that gives you even more. One example is, if you get 10 or higher on a skill check, for the next minute, you gain proficiency in a skill you didn't already have, because you are breaking the limit of your natural ability. You can also get other features that I have, and it uses the 5e base system, so you can just make a normal character in 5e, but I change how the D20 system works. And I even sometimes get rid of health and just use the fatigue system that's Powered by the Apocalypse, or the stress system by Cult Divinity, because I don't want to track number health where it's like, oh, I have 372 hit points on this boss and I'm tricking it down by 12, 17. I'm more like, look, enemies they have 2 points of fatigue for low level, and I have it like very easy, medium, hard, very hard, impossible, legendary. So every time you succeed, you get a half mark. If you succeed by 5 or more, it's a full mark, and so on and so forth. And that way, you're not tracking all this HP. You're just literally sitting on the edge of stress, fatigue. Your actual body is breaking down. Health points are one thing, but it's like you're feeling the exhaustion, the stress, and it reaches to a point that you don't die, you get injured. And I like using the injury system. So if your fatigue reaches 0, you don't die. You just suffer some kind of critical injury.
Yeah.
You maybe have massive migraines now for the rest of your life. Your perception is drops. Perhaps your leg is injured, so your movement speed is decreased until you can get that truly medically treated. Because I treat 5e, and I lean heavier and heavier into the narrative system of things. So a lot of my adventures stem on the fact that I want to tell a story. I don't want to play a game. So let's tell a story together.
Yeah, you mentioned it. So you mentioned the special moments and the limit breaks. I'm wondering, do you ever associate those with leveling up the characters?
In some of my notes, I have that as an option, that like when you reach a point where you're succeeding well enough that you choose the limit break, you are pushing to a point that I like giving boons more than leveling, because the features, the milestones give you the levels in the class. I still use the 5e class system, but I like giving boons left and right. So if you are doing so well in life, you get boons. And I also gift my players boons with detriments. I'm like, you can always accept an early boon, but it comes at a cost, because I want the world to feel that sense of things can be good, but karma is a thing. Because one thing I also have on my limit break is every time you spend one, the fates get one to spend against you. So congratulations, you can be awesome, but just know you're not the only person.
Interesting. And that's a very like naturistic outlook too, with the whole like everything that you do comes back to you tenfold. And then the second thing that you mentioned was permanent damage, and I love chatting about permanent damage. So I played a pirate game where people lost their limbs. Like, what are you guys' thoughts on permanent damage? How do you play it out in your campaigns? Have you done it before? Like, talk to me. I want to know.
Well, for me, I'm a huge fan of permanent damage. I always make the point, I'm like, so let's figure out who gets maimed today. But like, it's only because I'm like, look, if you make bad choices, bad things happen. I've had players lose their hands. I had players with tails that lost the tails, lost their feet, went blind. But I always do, because I'm a huge fan of like anime, I always do that journey of return, where even when you have a massive detriment, you learn to tailor what you can do to those. So like one example, someone lost their hand, but they were an archer. So what they did is they learned to mount a crossbow to one hand, and they have it in their shield, so they can mount it on their shield, point their shield, and pull on the crossbow latch to fire the crossbow. Because I think there's ingenious ways to overcome that. I think when you add permanent damage that can then break mechanics, it lets you be more narratively free. Otherwise, if you're like, oh, I'm a one-armed bandit, but they're like, well, it's fine, whatever, it doesn't matter. You can still wield a great sword with one hand, and we'll just say it's two-hand because you only have one hand. Then you're like, you're not really including the narrative, you're just making an aesthetic. I don't need aesthetics, I want narratives. And I want those narratives to matter.
Definitely.
It gives a player a chance to be creative too with that too. I like that.
Very much so.
Yeah. I haven't done it myself yet. My next campaign that we do, whenever this campaign ends, we're halfway. They got the level 10 last week, so they're halfway through. But the next campaign, I am working on a system for damage like that, just because I do want combat to feel more like combat. Like there's real consequences to even going into combat. Little about me, I'm a combat vet, guys. Hi. But that's something that I started playing these games after I got out of the military, and something that I would like to work into it is something where like going into combat, it costs something more than just using your resources. It can wear you down. So I'm working on a system. I might pick your brain a little bit on that. Might steal some things from you unapologetically.
It's the real reason we have this podcast, is to pick and choose and steal.
I mean, that's completely fair. Because I love combat too, especially because I also don't do when I do 5e, I do combat in a different way as well. I actually do cutscene combat. So I like letting all my players decide what they want to do, and then having each enemy react halfway through that. So like the combat doesn't even flow the same way. Use your resources is normal, but like every action has their reaction. So I'm like, who's attacking, so that all of you, and I think Powered by the Apocalypse is a strong form of this, where like they have the attackers, the defenders, and the watchers are kind of like the 3 steps of combat. So I kind of flow on like, who's all fighting? Cool. Who's doing more of defensive utility support? Well, you are kind of going to act after the attack because you're responding or preparing against that. And then I have the people who are watching, reacting, who are at any moment can be like, this is the moment that I'm interfering in to do the thing I want to do. So I am like, I dismantle 5e to a point that like I treat it more into that narrative, because I like the idea of going into, what are you doing? So as you do this person responds by trying to do this. So the next option is whoever one of the players wants to react to it, take it. Because I treat it like, also Fantasy Flight Games Genesis has an initiative system that I really enjoy as well, where everyone rolls initiative, and then you get all the player initiative, all the enemy initiatives, and a player can take any slot of the player initiative for that round, and the top of the round, you just pull everybody out of initiative, and you just plug them as they use it. So if like players get 1 and 2, enemies get 3 and 4, and the players gets 5 and 6, well, any one of the 4 players can choose slot 1 and so on and so forth, so that they can really feel that like cohesiveness of combat where you're like, no, we know what we would do because we team coordinate. I want that feeling of like, we know how we work. So the healer knows they can go later. The tank can go and prepare whatever they're doing. The trapper can settle the traps before the person who happened to roll a high initiative is now going. And there's nothing worse to me than someone who goes like rolls really high and they're like, well, I'm not going to do anything because that's not my role in this combat.
Right.
So then they have to pass turn. And you can hold an action, but you feel so wasted when there's so much more you could have done if you would just held your turn to go later. So I don't even do ready action. If someone says, I want to do this later, I'm like, cool, you can just hold your action. And what we'll do is you just go down the next initiative continuously until it's your turn, until you choose to release that held action.
That is actually something that I also do. What I typically do from start to finish is I have everybody tell me what they are going to do before anyone rolls anything. And I pick the initiative based on what they say versus having them roll and having others react on each other. Because it's like, I'm going to go head first and run in there. Why are they last in initiative?
Yeah, there's nothing worse than a barbarian who goes last and they're just sitting like, I would have already ran in by now.
Yeah, I do kind of just go from like left to right, or I'll mix it and start in the middle or whatever. I have everyone speak first and what they were going to do. So then I have them say what they want to do, and then maybe they'll hear someone say something and they're like, "Ooh, I'm actually going to be doing this." And then I will be like writing down like, okay, this person's first because they're obviously charging in first. This person's climbing a tree. They can go last. They're doing their action right now. Things like that. And then I'll plug in characters like based on, plug in the monsters or whatever they're fighting based on that. But that has ultimately helped a lot in having them, one, feel like they're in control of the combat, but also, that narrative flow, because as you said, like the barbarian that's charging in but he's last, it's like he charges in and then someone blows up an AoE, but they could have done that while the barbarian was charging in. So I'm going to have the person who's going to do the AoE go first, the barbarian comes in second. That's kind of like, it's really like, I want it to be efficient. At the end of the day, I do also pick the initiative of the monsters based on what they say. So I have just as much control, and that's something that I've learned to do over time. I started doing it on an escape scene. It was like an initiative. They were fighting mobs of people, and I was just so tired of the rolling that I was like, you know what? We're just going to talk this out. Like, we're just going to, pan through, what are you doing? What are you doing? And everyone had so much fun that I started integrating it a little bit more. It brings in so much, like, positive energy. It gets people engaged in what's going on because they're not just waiting for their turn on their phone, and then they look at their map. They're like, they actually have the opportunity to react to what someone just said, so that they can go next in the queue. But at the same time, you have to have a limit. Like, everyone does have to go before someone goes a second time. So, because it's like, it is, what is it, like 6 seconds per round? Like, you can realistically only do so much. So you got to keep it in limits. But that has been something that I've done that has really led to enjoyable combat. Just making sure you're like narratively talking through it.
I mean, I remember I had a dungeon master who did this technique, and then I took it immediately when I played in his game, where he has obviously normal combat, but if the combat has more than like a certain amount of enemies, he doesn't do combat, and he calls it a skill combat. Where he says, you tell me what you want to do, and I'll tell you what you need to roll to accomplish that. And it could be like I was an archer, and I was like, well, I want to release a volley of arrows because I'm an expert archer and I can let out like several of them. And he was like, okay, well, that's going to be your perception, and you can do this to see how many you hit. And it was just narrative, like, cool. So I rolled more of the skills rather than the weapons to really focus on the skills that I did to do the stuff. But I mean, I think what also I learned from that is I no longer say roll for initiative whenever I do combat. I tell all my players when I go, I say prepare for engagement. Because for me, I have my normal combat, I have my surprise round, but I also have the social round. Right before this, like in lieu with the surprise round, is the social round for all the people who want to talk before combat starts. Because I also don't like when that happens, when someone wants to talk when in response to combat, but initiative technically has like someone else going first, and that person is so gung-ho because they're like, no, we have to fight, right? And it kind of ruins the person who's like, maybe we gotta talk our way out of it, because the barbarian decided to run up and already hit everybody. But if the rogue's like, wait, let me use my turn to try to have this discussion, and then at any moment a player could say, well, I'm gonna charge in anyway, it's like, cool, well, you have now moved into the surprise round, sure. But it's prepare for engagement, because I don't want initiative is always tailored to combat. I say engagement to tailor to telling me what you want to do. That way you can still be like, because there's players who like, I want to run up a wall and do all this, but in combat, mechanically that doesn't work because it's really all this complexity. So I'm like, no, tell me what you want to do, and then we'll bend the rules to what my players narratively tell me, rather than the other way around of saying, this is what you can do, describe how you do these things. I like letting them have the freedom of just go ham. I mean, I watch anime, so anime goes ham, and that's my reference point.
That's fair. I enjoy the that social action as well. I do feel like it is missed. I always say like it's nice to provide the opportunities to at least have the chance to talk your way out of almost everything. I say almost everything because if you've made certain decisions, you're not going to be able to talk your way out of it.
If you've already attacked a village, they want to fight you. Too late.
Yeah, exactly.
Also depends what you're fighting too. If there's a Bahir in front of you, you're not going to talk to a Bahir. It's just going to try to attack you and eat you. So
right.
But
Yeah,
sure.
so I played in an Eldritch Horror campaign where like entities from the realm of beyond tried to attack us, and I still, as my character, was like, I'm gonna talk to you. Like, it's an Eldritch Horror whose goal is to consume your soul. I'm like, but can I try? I seduce Eldritch Horror. That was my character's thing. They literally had an attraction to Eldritch Horror. So I was like, let me run with that narrative. And I get the DM was like, it's not gonna work. And I'm like, I know that, you know that, but my character still needs to try.
Yeah.
Right.
But like, give me that chance to speak before everyone fights. And and I was like, yeah, they're like, you have to go to their face and talk to them. I'm like, I know it'll put me in a bad position. But I live by what my character would do, not what would make my character efficient. And that's what I lean into. Everything that I want to decide as a player and a DM is like, what would a character sincerely do? I don't want to do the tactical efficiency because that's not realistic, because not all adventurers are, I'm a trained soldier that knows how to be this and I could do this because I've been trained in decades. Some people play the characters like, yeah, I was just a random orphan and then I learned how to be a thief. They're not going to be super tactical. They're going to be like, I need to hide in a corner because I don't actually know how to fight, or I'm going to sit on this roof until I find an opening and sit there. But like, if you lean too mechanically, the rogue feels inclined to attack and get the sneak attack. I'm like, no, be you. And trust that the narrative will reward you for being you.
Yeah. I definitely agree.
Right? And like, if you have a cleric who's like, I've had a cleric spend 3 rounds of combat praying.
I mean, hey.
I'm like, you know what? You spent 3 rounds of combat. Enemies are shooting you with arrows and you did not stop praying. All right, I guess your god can pick up the phone real quick.
Yeah. I mean, that's dedication. It is. Of course. I mean, it depends on your world, obviously. That wouldn't work in my world because the gods are kind of like, not as present. But that's obvious. But yeah, that shows dedication.
And when it comes to being like a prepared DM, and I don't mind who's at my table. If someone's a combat heavy mechanical, I can run that. But like at my table, the reason why I don't have to hyper prepare and I say that 10-minute rule is because everyone who plays at my table, I explicitly say, you tell me what story you want to tell and I will mechanically let it fit. Everyone who plays at my table knows that's how I work. From the most rule heavy player to the one who's never played, I'm like, no, just tell me the story you want. And we'll mechanically let it fit. And I've had the people who are like extremely rules is written. I'm like, we're still fitting in the rules. You can call it aesthetics. I call it the story. At the end of the day, we're saying the same thing. It's the 6 on the floor. It looks like a 9 to you. It's a 6 to me, but it's the same thing. The rules are still being upheld. Yeah. I'm not having someone move 80 feet in one movement. They're still only moving what they can. But like, I'm narratively letting it go above and beyond to complete the task.
Yep. And hey, I've said it before, and I'll say it many more times. If a table or a DM or a player isn't working out, guess what? You can walk away, and it's all right. It's okay.
It's okay. You don't have to. For anyone listening, just if you're not comfortable at the table, don't stay just because it's a table. There will be a table that fits better for you. I used to be at a table where they were so rules heavy, and it stifled my creativity because I was like, well, the rules say this, so I'm going to do this. Because I'm always wanted to be the guy who one-handed a great sword, but I'm like, I just want to one-handed. Like, I know it's two-handed, so my other hand won't do stuff, but I want to one-handed. And they're like, you can't do that. I'm like, okay. And a lot of DMs did that up until a certain point where I met the streaming DMs who were like,
yeah,
do it.
Oh, yeah.
I love it.
Cool.
Do it.
Do
I've had
it.
some say it's disadvantage. Fine, swim with two hands, it's disadvantaged, and advantages can't count. And I'm like, cool, I'm okay with that too. Let me narratively do it. If it fails, it fails. But trust and believe, I'm going to try. And that's where I think like finding a table that just says, hey, I like what you're doing, do what you do. And if you don't like what someone's doing, speak up. And if speaking up don't work, you don't have to stay at the table.
Yeah. Exactly.
Definitely. And speaking on the like efficient characters versus like playing the characters, if you have someone at your table who is maybe wrote this crazy backstory and they've been playing this character very RP heavy, but then you notice they might be leaning into like I'm trying to be as efficient as possible, so they're not being their character. You could always just say like, would your character do that? Like you can question them. Be like, is that something your character would do? Because sometimes they'll be like, yeah, and then sometimes they'll be like, no.
Yeah, I do that move. I'm like I'll be like, all right, so tell me, is that what Jen wants to do? Or is that what so-and-so wants to do?
Yes.
Like, who's making this decision? And they sit there like, oh, you're right. I'm like, do what, trust in your character. You made them who they are, be them. I know what you want to do, because that would be the smart move. But your character's not the smartest one, are they?
Right.
It's okay.
Yeah,
I think...
and there can be consequences too. I mean, that happened last week. One of my halfling twins. One of my halfling twins is always the halfling twins.
Always.
they were orphans. They had this ward who raised them, and nothing super nefarious. But he used to cast suggestion on them to like make them do chores, stuff like that, you know. And the wizard hated it. She hated it growing up. Well, because I'm evil, I let her have suggestion. And she cast it on her sister in an RP moment last week, and I was like, "Oh, saving throw." And it was, you know, she was like, "Oh yeah, I hated that." I was like, "Yeah, you did. So let's see what happens." You know, she succeeded. It would have just put her at disadvantage for a day or something like that. But yeah, I mean, if they go against what their character would do or something their character hates, feel free to break that character for a little bit. It's fine.
I mean, yeah. I mean, and that's why I think it's like, I think the heaviest part comes to like letting players know that it's okay to play your character as they should. Mm-hmm. Don't worry about heavy on the rules. Don't worry if you don't know them. Because I think the other problem about being an overprepared DM is like you want to make sure that all your players have all the information they need to play their characters correctly. But that's not your job, nor should it be so hard. You just need to give them a platform to perform on, to be them best selves. And I think if you like, that's a lot of that. A lot of the prep is giving them the perfect experience. But I feel like a lot of the experience just comes from the players. And it's not that the DMs don't trust the players. I think it's the DMs are hesitant, nervous, scared of what'll happen if they don't have everything prepared. Because then you're like, what if they do this? And it's like, well, then that's okay. Because they're playing their character. Your job is to do the same thing. Play the world. If they do something that you didn't prepare for, it's okay. How would the world react? If you don't expect the rogue to steal from the king because you thought it would be a dumb thing to do and you didn't prepare for it, well, then what would the world respond? If they catch him, well, obviously they're going to try to imprison him, maybe execute him. Play that out. I know you prepare for the adventure for them to go over to the dungeon and do what they need to do. Well, I guess we're going to be a little side storied, and that's okay because the players now learn there's consequences. And I think it also saves you preparing later because now they know their actions have consequences. So when you set the road before them, they'll feel more inclined to be like, let's not deviate because last time it took us 6 sessions to break the rogue out of a maximum security prison.
Oh, man. Wow.
Yeah, that actually brings up reminds I'm playing again. I'm actually a player in a campaign. It's great.
Welcome back. Congratulations.
Yeah, oh my god, it's been years. We had our first session last Saturday, and the DM, poor guy, he's doing a great job. doing a great job. But there was this big fight, and at the end of it, he's like, "Do you guys want to go back to the war camp, or do you want to keep fighting?" And I was like, "How about we desert?" And he just gave me this look like, "Oh, fuck." and then after the game, he was like, I wrote out both of those options, but then I wrote down like, what if they do something else? I didn't plan for that, and you said it, and I was like, yeah, man.
It's just how it is. It's just how it is. So funny. We've talked about so much in the last 45 minutes already. We've talked about
45 minutes.
Yeah, it's flying by. We did prepping, we did bonds and hooks, we did tactical aspects of D&D, utilizing resources in dungeons, talked about special movements and limit breaks in Jay's campaigns, talked about permanent damage, narrative combat, and then like effective players and playing your characters. Like, holy heck, that was a lot of information in 45 minutes. But Jay, is there one solid piece of advice that you can give any brand new DM if they were just like, what is the best piece of advice you could ever give me? What would you say?
Before you ever approach the table, before you gather your resources to decide what you'll tell, before you put pencil down to paper, always remember one fact if nothing else ever sticks. Trust yourself and trust your players, and have fun with it.
Definitely. That's a really good piece of advice. You just gotta be having fun. That's really our goal. All around. That's why we're playing this game. Gamesa.
Yeah. I've played a dozen TTRPGs. I've played so many different systems, from those that are foreign to popular to indies to some that are in development. I've played them all. And no matter what, the one thing that stayed consistent among every system is that it's me and my players telling a story together. And I need to trust that they trust what I'm giving them, and I got to trust that they will give back. And that's like, all systems have that, whether or not it's written in the book. And every DM should just follow that.
Absolutely.
Very good advice. Very good advice. Yeah.
Well, my friends, I hope you enjoyed your drive to work or whatever you were doing while listening to this. And my name's Jen. You can find me on every platform at Jen is Online. And it was a pleasure talking with you today, Jay and Nick.
Yes.
Who are
Absolutely.
you? Tell us who you are and all your platforms.
Go ahead.
Nick, you can find me at EmoAasimar on Twitter and Instagram. I don't post much because I'm a dad and I'm busy with that whole thing. But you can find me there. And if you have any questions, seriously, hit me up. I will answer any questions you have. I'll talk this stuff all day, every day.
Awesome. Yeah, we do have a good time chatting about D&D. We do both stream Dungeons and Dragons. And Jay, tell us about you again and where we can find you at.
What did I say? Oh, yeah, it's Jay. Casual. You can find me on all social media at Just2Casual, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and pretty much any platform that lets me make a username is Just2Casual. And Casual Creativity on Twitch. Again, variety streamer, content creator in that capacity, telling all kinds of storytelling and enjoying weaving worlds with wonderful people. And I also am coming out with my own TTRPG that is anime-inspired soon. Am I allowed to plug it?
Yeah, plug it. Let's hear it.
So it is a 5e compatible experience. It is a retrofuturistic urban fantasy inspired by anime, shonen, manga, JRPGs, where you explore wondrous regions like a cyberpunk enhanced land of samurai, Victorian blimps powered by lightning mages fighting off pirates and dragons, and glorious stone-built castles retrofitted with technology advancements, where the world of the internet meets the old world of magic. We are constantly in a world of conflict between what we once knew was magical and what we now know is technology, and that threat that it comes. This is the 5e Deep Breath. And the question is, where do you stand? Inhale anticipation, take a deep breath, and exhale excitement.
Ooh.
Like it.
Hell yeah. That sounds awesome.
Like
and all of Jay's links will be down below in the description, no matter what platform you're listening on. And I appreciate you guys hanging out with us today, and we will see you later. Bye.
Au revoir.